Hello everyone, this is David Luscombe, and this game was taken from the 1960 Olympiad between Bobby Fischer and Mikhail Tal. Now in this position, Tal plays queen out to c7 and attacks the e5 pawn once more. So how should white respond? Well, the theory at this time was that white should play bishop out to f4 and defend the pawn. However, this bishop is a bit passive on f4, doesn't have a whole lot of space. And imagine for a moment if this pawn was no longer on e5. If the pawn were like on e3, for example, then this white bishop on f4 would have a ton of space. And so that was Bobby Fischer's theory. Bobby Fischer thought that pawns oftentimes were a hindrance to his own pieces, and he would willingly sacrifice a pawn in order to gain more space. So, the important question is space for the pieces more important, or is the pawn more important? Especially since this is a central pawn, and it's holding back black's central pawn majority over here. So that is, an interesting question that we have to ask ourselves in chess. And hopefully today I can provide some answers for that with this game example. Okay, so white plays bishop out to b5, which does temporarily defend the pawn. But honestly, if white is going to avoid losing the pawn, he'll eventually have to trade this bishop off. And so that was another interesting decision, because in chess, we're often told that if we do have the two bishops, that we should hold on to them and not trade one of them off, because it could be, a long-term endgame advantage. And so that's another competing idea. When we have the bishop here, should we keep it or trade it off? And really, it depends on the position. Each position is different, and here Bobby Fischer evaluated that the bishop pair is not as important here. So that is pretty interesting. So bishop out to d7 is played, and now black is ready to take here on e5. So white just castles. Yeah, so Bobby Fischer doesn't even bother to protect the pawn. And I mean, he could have. And here Mikhail Tal goes into a very long think for 40 minutes, and ultimately decides not to capture the pawn. But let's take a look at what happens if black does capture here. So knight takes e5, and here black should not capture this bishop, because if he does, then his king is in a lot of trouble, and this rook over here, yeah, is not going to be in the game. So instead of that, yeah, just capture the knight here on e5, and then the black king is drawn into the center and can no longer castle. So white's best idea here is queen out to d3. This is what Bobby Fischer recommended, and Mikhail Tal gave a little bit further analysis with a few more moves. Okay, but see here, the analysis ends, and Mikhail Tal says that white is better here. But if we were to continue this a little bit further, we could probably see it. So the king moved over here simply to protect the pawn. And so after a few more moves, we can see that white has a lot of initiative. White is aiming at the king's side, and the black is on the defense. So even though black does have an extra pawn, does black really have time to get his pawn majority rolling? And probably not, because white's attack is just coming incredibly fast. Yeah, even a6 is threatened here. That is even an idea that black will have to be careful of. So yeah. Okay, so let's go back to the actual game and see how it played out. Now, after bishop out to b5, bishop d7, and both sides castle. So here, it's white's turn to move once again. And so a lot of people would think, okay, at this point, I probably should defend the pawn, but Bobby Fischer says, well, you know, if this pawn were just gone, then I would have a lot of space, and if I could get a bishop to f4, then I could dominate this diagonal. So that's what Bobby Fischer is looking at. So he decides to play a move with his bishop, but he wants to put his bishop on the best square possible. And so bishop g5 is really, really good. It pins the knight to the rook, and here, if Mikhail Tal does not act fast, he's going to be lost. So Tal basically found a long sequence variation that forces a lot of pieces to be traded, and that leads to an equal position. Now there were, you know, some options here. I mean, certainly moving the rook over is an idea that would have allowed the game to continue, but Mikhail Tal just goes for a draw here. Yeah, because white needs to take the rook or he'll be down material, and then when black takes back here, well, white should fork. Anything else is not good. I mean, if white were to, let's say, capture the bishop, then black could take the knight, and black would be ahead material. So knight takes e6 is forced, and then after the queen moves, white is able to then take the bishop, hit the rook, and this is just a series of forced trades that ultimately lead to a draw, because black has to bail out. Yeah, queen out to g4, and after the king moves, then it's just going to be a draw. So, but yeah, I mean, it is very interesting though. Certainly quite interesting that in this position, after queen to c7, white could play bishop c4, but instead plays bishop out to b5, and decides to abandon that pawn in order to have more space for his pieces. So that is a really cool idea, and I just wanted to share that with you guys, and I hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you next time.